Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel, where I intend to equip you with the tools and information you will need to counter the radical left's unnatural and godless ideology. Today we're going to discuss why Hamas and the radical left are allies in anti-Semitism and terror. Our existential crisis, loss of a godly narrative capable of defining the nature of reality. Let us have a serious existential conversation, a discussion on the nature of reality itself, as to how and why we perceive the world around us as we do. Reality must be constrained in order to be perceived, since the nature of it is far too complex. Without constraints, we would simply drown in the details. This is why, since the 4th century, Christianity has provided the West with a consistent and disciplined framework which provided these constraints, a disciplined framework which defined our worldview. Yet in this emerging post-Christian world, the lack of such a framework has created an enormous void. In the absence of this grand narrative, we are confronted by nihilism and despair. Since nature detests a vacuum, the void created in Christianity's absence cried out for a new all-encompassing worldview, a one-size-fits-all solution which postmodern society could embrace to explain the nature of being and our place in a world of infinite complexity. Enter cultural Marxist critical theory. This theory, in conjunction with postmodern literary criticism, provides an operating system which informs how the radical left will examine the nature of reality, namely by dialectical analysis. According to a recent study at U of T, this worldview is most often embraced by those who have low verbal intelligence, since dialectical analysis often oversimplifies multivariate complex problems. After all, you cannot be very verbally adroit if you are willing to ignore inherent inconsistencies and contradictions in your own conclusions. Even as Marx and Engels based their Communist Manifesto on dialectical materialism, the radical left of today embraced this Hegelian concept of dialectical materialism and expanded it to include a critical analysis of intersectional oppression, which is why the threat from the founder of Hamas, calling for all followers around the world to dedicate their blood and souls to Palestine on Friday the 13th of October, which was yesterday, some of our own politicians have still declared open support for Hamas. We must ask how it is that leftists can call for restraint in dealing with terrorists who intend to maim and murder innocents while claiming that Palestinians are victims of post-colonial oppression. It demonstrates a willful ignorance of history to accuse Israel of being guilty of post-colonial oppression, given that Jews first inhabited the land of Israel some 2.5 millennia ago. Obviously, one cannot bargain with murderous totalitarian zealots who have sworn to destroy Israel and murder innocent Jews with impunity, who also hide behind their own women and children while doing so. Furthermore, you cannot reason with leftists who support them since they've divorced themselves from this reality. It is my opinion that neither belong in civilized society. So let us examine how the left attempts to reconcile the contradictions inherent in its inconsistent ideology. Subtitle: Hamas and Gaza. Hamas, a militant Palestinian nationalist movement, took control of Gaza after it won elections there in 2006. All of these I include my notes with for sources. So you're invited to look at them and review the sources as well. I never ask anybody to believe anything I'm saying. I research what I'm telling you thoroughly, and I ask you to investigate these things for yourself. Do not believe what I'm saying simply because I am saying it. Since then, since 2006, no elections have been held. The Gaza Strip refers to a narrow strip of land wedged between Israel and Egypt on the Mediterranean Sea. After the creation of Israel in 1948, Egypt controlled Gaza for nearly 2 decades. After Israel's victory in the 1967 Six-Day War against its Arab neighbors, it gained control of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. In 2005, under international and domestic pressure, Israel withdrew around 9,000 settlers and its military forces from Gaza, leaving the enclave to be governed by the Palestinian Authority, which also controls parts of the occupied West Bank. Despite pleas from the United Nations and human rights groups, Israel has maintained a land, air, and sea blockade on Gaza since 2007 that has had a devastating effect on Palestinian civilians. Israel says the blockade, which gives it control of Gaza's borders, and is also enforced by Egypt, is necessary to protect Israeli citizens from Hamas. The International Committee of the Red Cross considers a blockade illegal and says it violates the Geneva Convention. It says this idiocy in spite, of course, the fact that Hamas entered Israel and murdered innocents, including beheading babies. Again, all my sources are linked below that subtitle. My next subtitle: why does Egypt also block Gaza? Egypt has several reasons for maintaining restrictions on the Gaza Strip. Here are some key points. 1. Security concerns. When Hamas took over Gaza, Egypt and Israel largely closed their border crossing with Gaza on the grounds that Fatah and Palestinian Authority forces had fled the Strip and were no longer able to provide security on the Palestinian side. It doesn't sound like post-colonial oppression to me. They deserted their own. 2. Regional rivalries and international alliances. Egypt doesn't want to take the pressure off of Israel, which it holds responsible for running Gaza. At the same time, Egypt has an interest in weakening Hamas, which rules the territory. So here's a Muslim nation which wants Israel to run Gaza. 3. Fear of increased Iranian influence. Egypt was worried that Hamas' control of Gaza would increase Iranian influence. 4. Refugee crisis. Egypt is uneasy about the prospect of hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees crossing into its territory. So much for Muslim Brotherhood. 5. Preserving Palestinian rights. Egypt rejects any move to set up safe corridors for refugees fleeing the enclave to protect the right of Palestinians to hold on to their cause and their land. It's important to note that these are complex and sensitive issues with deep historical roots and ongoing political implications. Again, I list all the sources. Next subtitle: Iran's influence over Hamas. And I replied, provide you with a link to an article entitled Germany Schultz, Iran bears responsibility for Hamas attack. The article written by Thomas Eskret and Miranda Murray, dated October the 12th this year. Berlin Reuters. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said on Thursday Iran bore responsibility for helping Hamas grow to the point where it launched last weekend's attack on Israel, as he announced a crackdown on organizations that block the Islamist movement. While we have no firm proof that Iran operationally supported this cowardly attack, it is clear to us all that without Iranian support, Hamas could never have been able to launch this unprecedented attack, he said. The jubilant statements from the top of the Iranian government and some other government officials in the region are abhorrent. The leadership in Tehran shows its true colors without shame, and thereby confirms its role in Gaza. The Islamic Republic has celebrated the Hamas assault, but denied that Tehran was behind it. It's not really me making this blog or drinking this lovely glass of wine. Not really me. I deny it. In a special address to the German parliament, Schulz said his government would ban all fundraising and other activities supporting Hamas, including being seen to glorify its actions or displaying its symbols. He also announced a ban on Samudown, an international activist group that says it supports Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails, but which Germany's authorities say promote hate speech and calls for Israel's destruction. Samudown did not respond to a correct request for comment. Germany rallied around Israel after at least 1,300 people were killed and dozens taken hostage in a mass cross-border infiltration by Hamas militants into Israeli towns and villages near Gaza. It has frozen Palestinian aid pending a review. Germany has stepped up protection of Jewish institutions and banned a pro-Palestinian protest due to take place in the capital Berlin on Wednesday. Like other German leaders, Schulz said the country had a historical duty toward Israel, given its responsibility for the Nazi-perpetrated Holocaust. The sufferings of civilians in the Gaza Strip was likely to worsen, but that too is the fault of Hamas and its attack on Israel. I would say it's also a fault of the fact that Hamas hides behind women and children while murdering them. Schulz said, while also criticizing what he said was shameful silence of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, whose West Bank-based Fatah movement is a rival of Hamas. Gaza authorities said more than 1,200 people have been killed in a retaliatory Israeli bombing campaign. Schulz added that it was important to try and avoid a further regional escalation of violence, warning Hezbollah, another Iranian bloc militant group powerful in Israel's neighbor Lebanon, not to risk an attack on Israel. I am in close contact with Egypt's President Sisi, who has channels to Gaza. I will speak with Turkey's President Erdogan today and receive the Emir of Qatar, he added. All three can play an important role in de-escalating the situation. Oh, really? Why haven't they done so until now? My next subtitle, Why the Radical Left Sympathizes with Islamic Terrorists. This is a good one today because it's peeling back the scab on this festering wound and allowing you to see all the pus in said infected wound. So here are the reasons the left sympathizes with Islamic terrorism. Anti-imperialism. Some of the radical left view Western countries, particularly the United States, as imperialist powers that have historically exploited and oppressed countries in the Middle East. They may sympathize with groups that they see as resisting this imperialism. 2. Anti-Israel sentiment. Some individuals in the radical left are critical of Israel's policies toward Palestinians and may sympathize with groups that oppose Israel. Solidarity with oppressed groups. The radical left often emphasizes solidarity with oppressed groups around the world. They may view some Islamic groups as representing oppressed populations. 4. Critique of capitalism. Oh, here it comes. Some of the radical left critique global capitalism and may see some Islamic groups as resisting this system. And 5. Finally, 5. Misunderstanding or lack of information. In some cases, individuals may not fully understand the actions or ideologies of certain groups and may sympathize with them based on a lack of information or willful ignorance. My next subtitle, Dialectical Synthesis Leads to Oversimplifying Complex Problems. Dialectical synthesis is a concept in philosophy that refers to the resolution of a conflict between two opposing ideas or forces, known as a thesis and an antithesis. The thesis is the outcome of this conflict, or the synthesis, rather, is the outcome of this conflict, which can be a refutation of the thesis, a combination of the opposing assertions, or a qualitative improvement of the dialogue. This process is unending. And here we see the unending process. This defines why the Marxist revolution is never over, because the process of dialectical synthesis and analysis is unending. Utopia is never achieved. It's always some future state. This process is unending as your synthesis becomes your new thesis, for which it too will possess a counter proposition or antithesis. On the other hand, oversimplification refers to reducing complexity so severely that a distorted impression is given. It loses the nuances of an issue, and people may arrogantly believe that they can resolve the layered issue with simple solutions. Do you think? Unfortunately, simple solutions fail to tackle the layers within a complex issue. In the context of multivariate complex issues, dialectical synthesis can be seen as a method to understand and resolve these complexities. It acknowledges that all things are made of opposing forces and brings together the most valuable parts of two polarities to form a new meaning, understanding, or solution in a given situation. However, it's important to avoid oversimplification when dealing with such issues. Reducing complexities loses the nuances of an issue, and simple solutions fail to tackle the layers within a complex issue. Therefore, while dialectical synthesis can be a useful tool in understanding complex issues, care must be taken to avoid oversimplification. I would say care must be taken to recognize that it has never been employed in a productive way. It has always resulted in tyranny and murder. There is not a single political ideology, from Nazism to fascism to Soviet communism, Marxist-Leninism to Maoism. All these ideologies have all resulted in tyranny and murder. Finally, my conclusions and observations. The foremost reason that the left narrative fails is that dialectical synthesis ignores the very foundations of the morality of the West based upon Christian ethics, which is why the process of dialectical synthesis potentially leads to moral dilemmas if the thesis and antithesis represent conflicting moral values. In such cases, a synthesis might involve a compromise or reconciliation that some might view as morally problematic, or in my case, definitely view as morally problematic. Marx and Engels failed to explain the complexity of a market economy, since the dialectical materialism which formed the basis of the Communist Manifesto failed to do so. So it is with cultural Marxist critical theory and postmodern literary criticism, which fails to comprehend the complexity inherent to social cooperation, morality, and the human need for personal freedom and autonomy. Therefore, Hegelian dialectical analysis is far too simplistic to comprehend the meaning the left lost when they abandoned Christianity and the freedom in Christ that it affords. Moreover, authoritarian force must be applied to enforce leftism, since not everyone will voluntarily cooperate with its demands. First, let us consider the characteristics of a free citizen. English philosopher and physician John Locke described the basis of freedoms during the Enlightenment 300 years ago. He is widely regarded as one of the most influential thinkers on freedom and is commonly known as the father of liberalism. He said that we own ourselves, our time, our labor, and our physical bodies, including our tongues to speak. We can neither force anyone to listen to us or lose those rights when we enter society from a state of nature. That means that we are born with these inherent rights. They are God-given. Think of freedom on an axis or spectrum. Envision yourself as an individual citizen, not being lumped into one identity group or another. Where do you prefer to be on this freedom axis? On the right is a preference for more freedom and less authoritarianism, but on the left is a preference for less freedom and more authoritarianism. A leftist has a more elitist or socialist point of view, who believes that people cannot make their own decisions and that the nanny state must look after us. That is the result of dialectics applied to a society writ large. Where do you think there is more freedom to live your life as you choose? In Gaza, where there is no plurality, or in Israel, where Arabs, Jews, Christians, and indeed people of all faiths or none are treated identically under the law? So these are things to think and pray about today on this October the 14th, as we continue to pray for Israel and that these wicked deviants be brought to justice, and as we ourselves hold the left in each of our countries accountable for renewed anti-Semitism and for supporting terror and tyranny. God bless you all.